can you give us a bit of background about yourself, Robina?
Well, I actually started my career as a mechanical engineer back in the late 70s. The final year at university I specialised in bioengineering, which I found absolutely fascinating. So I then went on to do an MSc in neurocommunications, which is study of the nervous system. And my PhD was in hearing damage due to high intensity impulse noise. And during that, I ended up making a mathematical model of the ear in Fortran 4, which was my first experience into computing. Then after I completed my PhD, I went to work for Vickers Shipbuilders and Engineering and did a classic graduate apprenticeship on the shop floor. And for me, the shop floor was HMS Trafalgar, the first hunter-killer submarine we built in this country, nuclear powered but conventional warhead. And I didn't learn much about engineering at all, but I learned an awful lot about people and industrial relations. I then went to work in the planning department and ended up speccing a system to plan the manufacture of all the outfit material, the bits and pieces that go to be put in a submarine. And again, that sort of threw me into computing, and then I was offered a job as a project manager in a sort of newly formed, brand new computing department that had about 3 people in it.
Right.
And from that point onwards, I had a fairly classic career in IT. And my last proper job, I was the European CIO for Robert Fleming, based in the city, but I travelled all over Europe. And then that was about 14 years ago, and then I had a change of career, and I joined Cranfield School of Management as a lecturer in the Information Systems Group.
Is there much crossover between the two disciplines?
Neuroscience and engineering.
Yeah.
Well, I guess neuroscience is engineering of the human body, in particular the nervous system, so how the human body works. And when you look at eyes and ears, the mechanics of those eyes and ears come into it as well.
So as you were coming up through the ranks, did you have any role models, particularly female ones?
Not female ones. I've never worked for a female boss. But during my first year at university, summer holiday, we were encouraged to get ourselves a job in industry. And I worked for British Leyland at the time. And the manager of the Forge and Foundry was my boss. And he had probably the biggest influence on me as a role model.
Right, well, we're here today primarily to talk about your book. So who is this book aimed at, would you say?
Well, my brief was to write a book for IT professionals who were starting their first managerial position. However, as I wrote it, I found a lot of the things I was writing would be relevant for any level in leadership or management. And indeed, I had 2 CIOs reading the book for me as I was writing it, and both of them told me they'd learnt things too. So I think it's applicable to anybody. For first-time IT managers, I'd recommend they read it cover to cover. For more experience, possibly dip and dive into things that were most relevant or most troubling them.
So you've called it the art of IT management. Explain why you believe that management is an art rather than a science.
Because people are not robots. Each human being is different and unique, and what works with one person doesn't work with another. So it's very much finding your way and learning what works with the particular individual that you're dealing with at the time and how to get the best out of them. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And you can't reduce management to a process or a procedure.
So is there a right way to manage?
I wouldn't say there's a right way. I would say there are definitely wrong ways, but there's no single right way.
In the opening chapter of your book, you offer 5 simple rules to help managers get the best out of their staff. So how did you settle on these 5 specific rules?
I reflected back on my experience and when I'd been a first-time IT manager, and some of the challenges that I faced, some of the mistakes I made, and also putting myself into the position of somebody being managed by somebody else and the things that I'd want or feel most important.
So, what makes a good manager, you think? What are good managerial qualities?
I think you've got to have knowledge and know-how to know what you're doing and show people the way. You've got to have the passion to inspire and motivate, and you've got to have the empathy to deal with people as individuals and exercise compassion and engender trust and loyalty.
You've mentioned in the book about delegation, developing teams, relationship management, and giving feedback. Why briefly do you think those are good management practices?
Well, as a manager, your job is to get the best out of your people, and you stop being so much of a doer and you start working with and through people. So delegation, I guess, comes first. And in my experience, a lot of IT people are not very good at delegation because they don't believe anybody can do the job as well as they can. So there can be a reluctance to let go, or if they do let go, to micromanage. And again, with delegation, it's not a one-size-all-fits approach. It's got to be geared to the person concerned. Some people will need very detailed guidance in terms of how to do something. Others will prefer a blank sheet of paper. So it's working out what works for that person. And also you've got to get to know that person, because you don't want to let them go too far off the rails if they are the blank sheet of paper type, if they're going in the wrong direction. So looking for feedback, feedback's a two-way process. You give them feedback, but also you're looking for feedback from them in terms of your management style, and are you managing them effectively?
So have you noticed any significant differences between male and female managers, for example?
Female managers often have more of a natural ability when it comes to emotional intelligence than the average male. So the people skills sometimes come more naturally to a female. However, there are also downsides too, that female managers often can be softer than men. So they may be not quite so pushy or so hard driving, and that can have knock-on effects in terms of the job may not get done, or it might not be delivered on time, which again is not helpful in an organisational context. So there's both strengths and weaknesses on both sides.
Would you say there are any kind of management tics which are specific to IT managers rather than more generic managers?
Yes, IT managers statistically tend to be very detailed focused. Now that can be a very positive trait when you're writing a program. However, when you're coming to management people, it can be too prescriptive in terms of what you tell people to do and how you tell it. So it's very much focusing on the outcome that you want achieved, rather than being too prescriptive about how somebody gets to that outcome, because you'll take away all their motivation and their will to live if you're too prescriptive.
So how would you say the role of the CIO has changed over the years?
Well, I think as IT is becoming more and more pervasive in everything we do, the CIO, I think, has got a bigger role to play in the organisational context as a whole. And IT now is driving the way the business works. Often our product or service offering, we're talking about the Internet of Things, is going to become more and more significant. However, unless IT people can have an influence in the wider context of the organisation, even though they've got great ideas into where the business could go, those great ideas may not be listened to if they cannot have the influence and impact.
Yeah, I mean, I've interviewed quite a lot of people who've CIOs who've been frustrated that even though they're C-level management, they haven't really been invited all the time to the top table to be discussing the strategy for the forthcoming year. I mean, is that improving now, do you think?
In pockets. I think we've still got an awful long way to go. And I coach a lot of senior IT people, and one thing that I get disappointed with them, they would say, if only I was invited. Well, I think the onus is on the IT leader themselves to make sure they are invited, and that is through having, through demonstrating their worth and value, and then they will be invited. You can't wait for it to happen. You've got to show what you can do and what you're capable of, and you've got to have the influencing skills, the charisma and the gravitas to be invited.
So what was your number one tip for IT professionals thinking of embarking on their first managerial role? What one thing that they should kind of carry home with them?
Think about how you've been managed yourself in the past and the attributes that you've appreciated in your own bosses.
So you work with senior IT professionals in your role as a management coach these days. So what do you see as being the most common shortcomings that you see in their approach to IT management?
Believing that you are right is enough. It's about your ability to build relationships, to have impact, to have influence, and to get your ideas across. And if you can't do that, the best ideas are going to go unheard, unnoticed.
So I noticed also there's a chapter in your book about dealing with stress and pressure. What's your top tip for dealing with stress and for pressure?
Develop a sense of humour, so you can laugh it off when things go wrong, which they inevitably will in IT.
Now, Agile is becoming increasingly used as a project management kind of platform in organisations. I mean, what are your thoughts about sort of Agile techniques? Do you think they improve working practices?
Well, I started working in IT in business back in the early 80s, and in those days we used to prototype. Now, I don't see Agile and prototyping a million miles away from each other, and it's something that I used to promote and advocate in the old days of the 80s, but this is before the days of processes and procedures and methodologies, and IT was very much flying by the seat of your pants. And we would sit down with our business customers and we would do things together, and it worked. And I think the pendulum swung there to there with the advent of processes, methodologies, ITEL and that sort of thing, and Agile is merely bringing it somewhere back to the middle. So I think it's a good thing, but I think it's, for a lot of people, letting go of the processes and procedures and methodologies and the old waterfall approach is going to be hard to let go.
You go back to the book itself, what did you find were the main challenges for writing the book?
Getting myself motivated to write the first half. I think after I'd written the first 2 chapters, I realised how much work was involved and how long it was going to take. And I looked at the time I'd got left and I got a bit depressed. Once I was halfway through, the rest was a little bit of plain sailing.
Now, project failure is quite a big subject in the UK, probably due to a number of failed big government projects, like Connecting for Health, etc. So what do you think project management, IT project management, has had such a bad press in recent years, and what do you think could be done to improve the situation?
That's a difficult one.
So you don't have to answer it if you don't know, if you want to think about it.
I think I can answer it. I think with project management, often we forget the people aspect of projects. And I think that is the biggest point of failure, the people aspects and dealing with corporate politics and helping people overcome resistance to change, and also being honest throughout a project life cycle. And when things do start to go wrong, putting your hand up at the first sign rather than waiting till it's become a minor issue's become a major problem. And being totally honest up front and realistic about timescales, and not being over-optimistic but also not being too pessimistic.
It's funny you should mention about corporate politics. I mean, obviously that's something that's in most organisations. I mean, do you have any kind of thoughts about how particularly new managers can kind of ingratiate themselves with the organisational politics they find themselves in? I mean, it's quite a difficult thing to deal with, isn't it?
Well, politics is a fact of corporate life, and as soon as you get more than one person, you get different viewpoints, different opinions, and that when is politics when creeps in. So it's all about how you handle those differences. And if you handle them in terms of influence, communication, putting your cards on the table, being honest, you can usually work things through.
I've interviewed quite a few CEOs, CIOs, and one of the problems they often face is that they go into an organisation and there tends to be a number of different silos who don't communicate very well. Would you say communication is one of the key problems in larger organisations in particular?
I think it's a huge problem. But I think it's also something that if you've got the right mindset, is easy to resolve. Do you want a story?
Yeah, give us a case study.
This is before I even started my career properly. It was a holiday job in between school and university, and I was working at Cadbury Schweppes, and I was working in the factory engineering department. And my job was to take over from the planning engineer in 3 weeks when he was on holiday and manage the schedule between the pipe shop and the electricians. And I went to the first meeting, and there was a huge long list of jobs to be done. We went through the list, and not one single job had been done that was on the list. Then they was asked, well, what had they done? And there was lots of jobs that weren't on the list that had been done. So as a sort of 17-year-old, I thought this was very confusing. So when I was in charge, I went to talk to the manager of the pipe shop to find out how things worked and why this list didn't seem to work. And I did the same with the engineering manager. And I found out basically they hated each other's guts. At the time, unionisation was a big issue. So the pipe shop couldn't do any of the work on their lists because they were waiting for 2 wires to be disconnected. And if they'd disconnected them, everybody would go on strike. And the electrician manager deliberately didn't disconnect these wires because he didn't like the pipe shop manager. So I used my female skills and I made a friend of the manager in the electrician shop, and I talked about his son and I let him just talk to me and I became his friend. And then I'd say to him, would you just disconnect these 2 wires for me, please? You know, not for him, just do it for me. And he'll say, just for you, I'll go and do it. And that created 100 hours work for the pipe shop manager. And that's corporate politics.
It's amazing how common it is as well. So, as I said earlier, BCS has got an ongoing interest in women in IT and the role women play. I mean, IT is often perceived as being a bit uncool, full of geeks and nerds. And I mean, what do you think the industry could do to improve its image to kind of, particularly encouraging more women to get into the industry?
I think we need to talk to girls in schools before they've made choices of even O-levels or GCSEs. And also we need to talk to their teachers, because I don't think the teachers understand what IT is really about. And perhaps we need to teach the teachers to pass the message on to the children as well. I personally have volunteered to go and speak in some local schools. I've volunteered for 2 years. I haven't done one school yet. I cannot get in.
That's a bit disheartening, isn't it? You were talking about schools. That was going to be my next question. Do you think the way we teach IT in schools is discouraging girls?
I think we teach a very narrow aspect of IT in the corporate sense. And I think there's perception IT is about coding, it's about tablets, it's about smartphones. And that's just a fraction. It's a postage stamp of what IT is about. We need to teach in the broader concept, and we're not doing that.
I think things have improved a little bit with, them using things like Raspberry Pi in schools, etc. And I know they've changed the curriculum, but they do seem to be sort of lagging behind other European countries. How do you think we are in comparison with Europe and America with how we teach?
To be honest, I haven't got a clue. I don't have children myself, so I've never experienced recent schooling. I did do something with the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, and in terms of girls having careers in engineering, and I did that for I think 7 consecutive years when I completed my PhD. But when I hit 35, they sacked me because they told me I was too old to relate to the girls.
Ouch. You kind of already answered this question, but do you think women are better at dealing with organisational politics than men?
In a lot of respects, I think they've got a natural advantage. Where they may be lacking is that men tend to be more assertive than women, and women are more likely to get trodden on or allow themselves to be trodden on. But in terms of the people side of it, yes, they do have a natural advantage.
Do you think the glass ceiling still exists for women, particularly at the upper management level?
I think it does. I think there's numerous barriers there. And I think it's almost being different in any context. But the problem is when recruiters have got 100 CVs, they've got to sift through them some way. And if you don't fit the classic model, you often get filtered out.
Do you think it's harder for women to achieve a good work-life balance?
I think it depends on your partner and how much they're prepared to muck in. If they're the sort of partner that expects you to do the stereotypical female role as well as work, yes, it is very challenging. But if you've got a husband who's prepared to muck in with cooking and cleaning and shopping and children, I don't think it's a problem.
You imply in your book that the levels of bullying are quite high in IT. Why do you think that is, and do you think women are more likely to be on the receiving end?
From personal experience in my work now as a trainer and as a coach, I've had it's such a high percentage of people tell me they're being bullied and how do I cope. If you read some of the statistics on bullying, it seems to be quite high in IT. I'm not too sure. I don't think women are more likely to get bullied than men. I use one psychometric instrument when I've developed myself based on archetypes, and there is a correlation there between the bullied and the bullies. And I think that's more of an indicator.
You just mentioned mentoring, which reminds me to ask you. So, what do you think makes a good executive level coach?
Somebody who genuinely wants to do it, genuinely wants to help and develop people. Somebody who is prepared to listen without giving advice. Maybe you end up giving suggestions or examples, but at the end of the day you're helping somebody come to their own conclusions. So you've got to avoid telling people what to do. You've got to listen, you've got to actively listen, you've got to be sensitive, and you've got to build a relationship with them. It has to be a trust-based relationship, and you must never break that trust.
Have you yourself been on the receiving end of coaching and mentoring?
I have, yes.
How did you find it? Did it inform your own ways of doing it?
It did, but probably more in the context of how not to do it.
Good point. I just wanted to finish off on a few sort of more general points about the IT industry. BCS has been pursuing for a number of years professionalism in IT, because obviously with a lot of more longer established organisations and careers like health and building, etc., there are a lot more I'm trying to think of the word, bodies that kind of manage the behaviour, whereas in IT we've kind of done things voluntarily. I mean, do you think the government should kind of get involved more, or do you think it should remain voluntary to have codes of conduct within the IT industry?
I think, given that IT is invading all our lives, both work and personal, so much, laws tend to be lagging behind issues that we're facing, the potential for fraud and theft and things like that. I think possibly the government should intervene more, because there is going to be more and more onus on us as professionals, A, to get it right, and B, not to leave our companies open to misuse or fraud or things like that. And I think there's huge risks in the world through potential, and IT can be used for positive and negative reasons, like any innovation or any advance. But we just want to make sure it's used for positive rather than negative. And we need to protect ourselves as individuals and as organisations against the potential destructive use.
I'm not sure how au fait you are with the software industry and that, but do you think the UK is in a quite a healthy place at the moment, or are we lagging behind the rest of the world with our software development? Because I hear a lot from security experts saying security is too often a bit of a bolt-on to software being developed all around the world. I mean, how do you think the UK is in relation to other countries with that sort of thing?
I haven't really got a clue, but I'm guessing, as with a lot of inventions, in the UK we're very good at coming up with ideas. We're very good at inventing things theoretically. What we don't do is take those inventions to a finished product, and other countries seem to be better at that than we are, which is unfortunate.
I interviewed the inventor Trevor Bayliss, who did the Clockwork Radio years ago, and he was saying that we're very good at coming up with ideas, but we're not very good at patenting them straight away, and we're not very good at developing them, taking them into an industrial setting and making money off it. We're great with coming up with ideas, but pretty useless at the rest of it. What developments in IT technology have you personally found to be the most exciting in the last few years?
I think a lot of what is happening in medicine is really exciting, and I think clinicians see the advantages, even ones that have been a bit technical phobic in the past. They're seeing the benefits and they're really using them. It's not quite joined up, but in terms of when you've got an individual patient in terms of how you treat that patient, what we can do now is streets ahead of what we could do even a few years ago. I think the other thing that's having a benefit, certainly in pockets, is analytics. And certain organisations have started using that to real advantage.
And where do you think IT managers should be focusing their attentions in 2016?
I think they should be focusing their attentions very much outside of their own organisations, scanning the whole world in terms of technical possibilities, technical advancements, what other industries, what other industry sectors are doing with technology. And they should be bringing in those nuggets of wisdom to their own organisations, and they should develop the influencing skills to be able to get the message across to the senior leaders or decision makers.
And I just thought I'd say it's probably quite a good time to do this. If you were just summing up why a would-be or pre-existing manager might want to pick up a copy of this, how would you kind of sell it to them?
I've written that book as a very practical book, and I've also written it in the mindset that most people are busy and most people don't have time to read books. So it is waffle free. I practice what I preach, so it has humour in it. It is easy to read, and probably I'd say it's probably the best book I've read in a long time. I know I'm biased.
Brilliant. It's more of a personal question. Is what motivates you nowadays? You don't have to answer it.
No, I've never been very ambitious in the classic sense of the word. My motivations in life are probably freedom, adventure, and fun. I like new things, I like new challenges, not because they're going to get me rich or promoted, just because it's interesting to learn. And I also like helping people, so if anybody asks for help, I cannot help but do it.
So giving back to society.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that by reading that book, I will help some future IT managers be better managers, quicker than they would otherwise be.
Thanks for your time, Robina. Excellent, thank you.